Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
The confidence vote in France ends with no confidence. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power as French Prime Minister Francois Bayrou faces now what appears to be the end of his political career only 9 months after becoming prime minister. This may sound familiar. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington with a redhead on the terminal. Kriti, 4 prime ministers in the last 20 months. Apparently not enough for France.
You keep coming right back to the same issue. We're no stranger to right here in the U.S., which is what do you do with the budget? What do you do with the ballooning deficit? Yep. And the French have it even tougher. They have a lot of things like pension reform and holidays they have to work through.
Yeah, austerity is the word of the day here. It's just remarkable how quickly this went once again and how many times this has happened. Emmanuel Macron now would, appoint another prime minister, presumably from his central party bloc, but we'll find out, I guess, imminently here. It's
really tricky. I mean, the French parliament is quite literally divided into thirds. So to find any sort of majority, especially when you have the threat of Marine Le Pen and the far right on their doorstep, it's a really tricky one.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does this unfold over the coming hours? We just literally got this vote. The redhead rolled about 30 seconds ago, and a series of events will now unfold.
Absolutely. And let's not even forget about this bond market that is really reacting to this. But there's a question here of this. We're coming through this just again. Again, it's a very similar feeling that we have right here in the States, which is, oh, look, it's another shutdown. It's another budget negotiation. Right. The French feel the same way. And
conversations about debt and deficits, austerity, do you accomplish this by cutting budgets or raising taxes, which is really a very big question that they're trying to answer in France and one that we're struggling with here in the United States, isn't it?
And we should mention that France is one of the highly taxed countries in all of Europe. They're trying to push for investment. They're trying to push for AI. Emmanuel Macron really trying to make it a hub for investment, pull money away from London, pull money away from Germany. You can't do it if you're taxed at over 40%.
Well, this is going to be really interesting over the next hour. We've got some important voices lined up for you, beginning with Oliver Crook, Bloomberg's Europe correspondent, who's in France right now with the latest. Oliver, this just landed a moment ago. What's the reaction and the feel on the ground?
Yeah, well, listen, this is something that had been very much anticipated by the French public ever since this confidence vote was called a couple of weeks ago. You know, it was really a foregone conclusion for many. He was giving interviews all week, the prime minister, and they basically were opening the interview saying, how does it feel to be in your few last days? And that is a sentiment that was validated today, just now as you speak, by the French parliament that voted no confidence for the 4th prime minister, as you said, over the last 2 years, highlighting the sort of political fragmentation, which, by the way, is a story in France, but is a story all over Europe, but really finding its heart here in France. And Francois Bayrou, earlier a couple hours ago when he spoke, he said, listen, you guys today have the power to topple this government. What you do not have the power to do is ignore reality. And the reality that he is referring to is a debt to GDP burden that is absolutely the 3rd highest in all of Europe. The GDP to deficit, which is the 3rd worst as well, almost 6%. That is almost twice what it is for the average of the European nations. And this is 51 years now that France has not had a balanced budget. The question is, at what point do the bond vigilantes take over? Do they really impose this austerity that he was trying to sort of, through reform, bring into the fore? But as you say, you know, this is a French parliament that is divided into 3 groups. And even within those main groups, you have splinter cells within it. And it just shows you how difficult the path ahead is now no longer for Francois Bayrou, but for Emmanuel Macron, the president, who took that gamble last June in calling the snap elections and legislation and really backfired colossally. And that is the situation that he needs to continue to live with.
Ollie, we've seen this movie so many times, as you said, just the last 2 years, especially since Emmanuel Macron called those snap elections last summer. Was it 2 summers ago? I can't even remember. It's all a blur now. Walk us through just a massive step back. What is the future of Emmanuel Macron? If he keeps losing prime ministers, does this threaten his re-election or his succession when it comes to 2027?
So listen, for Emmanuel Macron, he really has 3 options here. The first, and this is probably the most likely, is he's going to have to appoint another prime minister and just kind of keep rolling with this really inconvenient parliamentary setup that he's got. Where is he going to choose it from? Is it going to be from the center? This is what he's been trying to do. He's been trying to push center and sort of right-leaning prime ministers. Is he going to have to go to either a cohabitation, say, with the socialists in order to woo the left, or maybe someone that's a former socialist that has sort of gone to the center? That could be a path forward. The other is, of course, what we've heard from a number of people in that chamber today, calling for another legislative election. But if you look at a lot of the polls, that is going to basically erode Emmanuel Macron's already sort of diminished role within the parliament, and also basically not really change the sort of political physics that we've got here with those three major blocks. And of course, the last would be resignation. This is very, very unlikely. Emmanuel Macron has pushed back against this. He's going to stay president until 2027. That is his intention at very least. But again, it is getting louder and louder, and you're getting more and more sort of objections from that chamber. And, you know, Marine Le Pen, who now is the biggest party for the first time ever, a much larger protagonist within French politics.
Fascinating. The vote, by the way, we're talking about 194 voted for Bayrou, 364 voted against. Oliver, just looking at the reaction in the Euro, which is basically no reaction, speaks to the fact that this was expected or something else?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of this has been priced in. Again, we're some distance away from the sort of red alarm bells ringing across the sort of market complex. But we've got another rating from Fitch that comes out on Friday for France. It's expected to be downgraded. I mean, as you know, with these sort of financial crises that sort of develop at the national level, it's never sort of an instigating event. It's more art than science. And when you look at the sort of spreads that we've seen between Germany and France, I think the thing to really look much closer to is the spread between Italy and France on the 10-year benchmark yield. You look at that, that has come down to 5 basis points. It's only ever crossed below 5 basis points one time since the sort of turn of the century. And that just shows you where the investors currently are pricing risk for France. And again, as François Bayrou said earlier today, this is not just about politics. This is about the future of France remaining a sort of a relevant force on the global stage. He says you can be brought into submission by foreign militaries or by creditors, and that is the main concern for many of the French here.
Bloomberg Europe correspondent Oliver Crook live in Paris. Oliver, thank you so much for the snap reporting in this case. No confidence in the prime minister, and we're lucky to have Kathryn Kleppinger back with us today. She was here 9 months ago when he got the job, and back today as associate professor of French and Francophone Studies, International Affairs at George Washington University. Professor, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. 4 prime ministers in 20 months. What would be different about a fifth?
That is, I think, the question everyone's asking. And, I think the biggest question, as I heard from the previous correspondents here, is, which party can one even recruit from? We're hearing from Marine Le Pen, who's saying it's an obligation to dissolve the parliament. So, of course, she has her position. I've been reading that, the party leader for the Socialists is kind of angling for it. There have been many other, kind of the further left is saying that they will automatically vote, sent to censure the next prime minister. So, I mean, it's an open question. And yeah, I wish I could read some tea leaves here, but I fear that we're going to be dealing with more of the same.
Mm-hmm.
Professor, in every iteration of this, there's always the question of the threat of the far right. Marine Le Pen on ice until she has some decision-making, some guidance from the appeals court about a 2027 run. Not enough confidence in Jordan Bardella. Is the national rally still a threat the way it was when Michel Barnier was ousted?
I think that's been the most kind of interesting point of this moment, to see that Marine Le Pen has shifted her discourse a little bit away from calling on Macron to, resign, because it's not in her interest for Macron to resign right now, because then she couldn't run. So, she's leaving it much more in a parliamentary domain. I think she's still very much focusing on, now that we know the appeals trial will be in January of 26, she's looking at a longer term game here. I'm seeing from kind of man on the street interviews of National Front or National Rally voters that they do want a new election, but that, now Marine Le Pen has to balance, some of the more kind of populist voters who want to disrupt the system with the more stable, market-focused, business community that has been less excited about her candidacy. And so, does she tilt the cart now in order to, impose her party, or does she hold her cards closer for a longer trajectory? It looks like that's where she's leaning right now because it plays in her interest. But it's true that there is a, sort of groundswell from a certain fraction of society looking for change. It may have come up a little earlier, but there's supposed to be a massive day of rallies on Wednesday that was planned before this vote. So there is this block block everything movement announced. They're calling for tractors, to block the roads, and it's throughout France. And so, it's like, how is that going to play in? Do we have a new yellow vest movement? Is that going to mobilize or, kind of detract attention from this? I don't know.
Interesting. Well, when we consider what's about to happen, and you're pointing to Wednesday, which I'm very curious to see how this all plays out, Bayrou's obsession with cutting debt is what got us to this point. What would be the winning message for a successful prime minister?
I think that's the question that, I wish I had the answer again. It sounds like I'm hearing a lot of criticism on Macron for his tax cuts to the wealthy, while also then proposing cuts to social services. So it sounds, like a lot of the debate is still going back to Macron in a way that the prime minister may not have as much control over. But in terms of, where does that leave us for the future? The prime minister will need to look at, what does the budget do with, defense spending? That's been a big topic, that impacts the Franco-American relationship. He needs to figure out, how do we balance Social Security reimbursements and retirement ages? So these are all different moving parts that have a negative impact on the budget. And I think that was Bayrou's point from the start. One of the surprising moments from his speech this morning was that he kind of altered the figure on France's overarching, national debt by adding, it went from 3.3 trillion to 3.4 trillion. So he's, kind of trying to play this responsibility card, but showing that, this is a very serious problem that no one has managed to solve. And, it's going to force a lot of really hard reckoning. There's been a lot of criticism that, one proposal was to cancel 2 holidays, one day from Easter and then from May 8th. Is that going to be enough to change France's economy? Hard to see that playing in, that doesn't play well with anyone, really.
Yeah, over my dead body on the holidays. Professor Kleppinger is going to stay with us as we add the voice once again of Stephen Carroll, the host of Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Stephen is live in Paris as well, having just reported on this breaking story. Stephen, how is this being felt by voters, by people in France? Do you have to have a sense of humor to talk to your neighbor today?
I think probably, but I mean, look, because of the situation, and you mentioned we're heading into our 5th prime minister now in 2 years. This is something that people have gotten used to, and everyone knew when Francois Bayrou was appointed to this job that he didn't have much more chance of winning support than Michel Barnier did before him. He wasn't from outside of the political family that could have changed the parliamentary arithmetic in France and brought in more votes that might have made it easier to pass laws through Parliament. Opposition to him was pretty instant, and when he got to his outlining of the budget, and I think the kite flying around ideas like cutting 2 public holidays was a very interesting tactic, because he was putting on the table, and he admitted this almost immediately, he was putting on the table the most controversial measures so that people would debate them. And his hope was that parliamentarians would get involved and there would be negotiation. And he always said all of the measures were up for negotiation, but with the red line of bringing down the debt and the deficit. Unfortunately, the Parliament is simply too fractured to be able to do that. Everyone looked to their own political interests rather than necessarily looking to the bigger picture and trying to work with it. Everyone's acutely aware that there's a presidential election coming in 2 years' time, and they're pretty much just trying to stake their positions in the ground in the run-up to that, so that they'll be sure that there won't be a centrist who would replace Emmanuel Macron in 2 years' time. Now, a lot can happen in politics, and particularly in French politics, in 2 years. We should point out the last presidential election in 2017 was a big surprise as well for Macron to win. So nothing is all played for yet. But I think for most people in France, they're mostly worried about the protest movements tomorrow, how they're going to get to work, what services will be available, and how serious the protests are going to be.
More drama to come when it comes to Paris. Stephen, just walk us through what a crisis scenario actually looks like, because I hear you. I hear that a prime minister is now gotten or removed basically from the French government. But the bond market's calm, 76 basis points on the Haute-Bund spread. We're looking at a euro dollar at 117. Everyone kind of knew this was telegraphed. What does a crisis in France look like?
this is a Gallic shrug from the markets. That's essentially what we've gotten. And that is because it had been so obvious how difficult François Bayrou's problem was going to be because of the numbers in Parliament. When he called this confidence vote, we pretty much knew the result of it about 10 minutes after he announced it, never mind waiting the 2 weeks for all of the debate and the pleading that came from François Bayrou before we had the vote in the past few minutes and the result of that as well. Markets are looking at the longer game here. François Bayrou did say in the negotiations, and this was the point that was being made by the Socialist Party, is that you can consolidate the budget over a longer period of time. Bloomberg Economics has said this as well. This is not a fiscal crisis yet. The problem is, as the debt servicing costs in particular mount up, and the trajectory, as François Bayrou repeated, is pretty steep from here on up as to how much of the budget is going to be taken up by simply servicing the existing debt that France has and what it's projected to accumulate. In the short term, there's still time, over a month before France is meant to submit its budget to the European Commission. That's mid-October. It doesn't need to pass it really until the end of December. And remember, we got right up to that deadline last year. And even if, in a case that there was no budget passed, there is no provision for, I heard you mention this earlier, there's no provision for a government shutdown in France. You simply roll over this month's budget into next year. It's not a dramatic handbrake turn for anyone. Sure, there will be some people who will be hit by, no inflation-linked increases and things like benefits, but it's not a dramatic change. Things don't close overnight as a result of the budget crisis in France. It does, of course, just push the problems down the line, and that's something the bond markets definitely will be worried about. And I heard Oliver refer to the ratings downgrades or the ratings reviews that are upcoming, the first of which on Friday. There's several of those to come before the end of November as well, so those will also be very closely watched by the markets.
Really interesting. Let's bring Kathryn Kleppinger back into the conversation. Professor, did Bayrou have a choice here? He decided to pull the trigger on this himself.
Right. I think that is one of the most interesting aspects of this moment, that, I'm coming back here in similar circumstances, but the details are actually very different, where Barnier was kind of solicited, he went through the executive order style of budget negotiations, and then his government fell as a kind of punishment for that. Bayrou was doing something very different. He said from the start, this is a problem. Debt needs to be dealt with. Rise up to your responsibilities and do something about it. And so he is going out in a very different posture from some of the previous governments that have fallen. I found myself thinking that it was an interesting gesture that, he was challenging the delegates to live up to what he considered, a responsibility as elected officials. I'm not sure what his alternatives were, although that said, I've read some behind-the-scenes commentaries that he hasn't been as forthcoming with negotiations as, for example, the socialists were looking for. So he may claim, from one side that, I'm putting you in front of your responsibilities, work together, or I'm out. On the other hand, was he truly trying the backroom dealings of negotiating with all the different parties? Hard to say. It looks like he did not want to find himself in the position of trying to, for lack of a better term, herd the cats of all the different parliamentary parties, the way Barnier did try to do. And, trying to please everyone meant that he pleased no one. So, I think it's interesting. I've read the idea and I've thought about the idea that it is in some ways similar to the gesture that Macron did in dissolving the parliament, where it's sort of a poker move, that it's a surprise. Macron called it throwing a bomb into the political sphere when he called those snap elections. Maybe it's the same thing.
Well, I'm just wondering when we're all going to be back together here talking about the next confidence vote. Kathryn Kleppinger, Stephen Carroll, many thanks to both of you. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta with much more to follow here as we turn back to domestic politics and a conversation coming up with Congressman Mark Takano, the Democrat from California, next, only on Bloomberg. From French politics to domestic politics, and a breaker on the terminal here. If you haven't heard this, we got news from the Supreme Court a short time ago, backing the Trump administration's aggressive enforcement efforts in California, in this case specifically Los Angeles, where federal immigration agents will be allowed to resume using tactics critics say amount to racial profiling. In this particular case, a person's apparent ethnicity cannot be the only grounds for officers to have reasonable suspicion to check legal status, but can, Kriti, be a relevant factor along with some of the others that have been identified in the Supreme Court's precedents. This just now landing at the same time that this administration is threatening to go into Chicago. That was the latest we heard. Tom Homan over the weekend said, absolutely, it will be this week.
Absolutely. These are some scary headlines. We should mention, though, this was something that the appeals court had put a pause on when it comes to whether the immigration raids on that basis are even legal, that the Supreme Court has basically overturned when it comes to the appeals court ruling.
Yeah, right. It also comes with not only the president threatening to go into Chicago, but any number of different cities. Posting on Truth Social over the weekend a meme from Apocalypse Now where he looks like Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. This says, I love the smell of deportations in the morning. The president, by the way, was asked about the second line in that tweet or post on Truth, in which he suggested that we would be going to war in Chicago after they renamed Department of Defense Department of War. Last week, he reacted to that when asked. Here he is.
We could do the same thing in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. We did it. We saved Los Angeles. We saved Los Angeles, Dan. You know that. Los Angeles was a mess. If we didn't send our troops in, Gavin Newsom would have had a real problem. We sent our troops. The head police officer, the top person, said we could have never done this alone. We sent our troops right in at the beginning, and we killed it. And it was nasty, but we killed it.
That was the president earlier today, in fact, at an event about religious freedom. It's where we start our conversation with Congressman Mark Takano. This is personal for the congressman because he's from California, a Democrat in the 39th district, where much of this is resonating. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. What's your thought on the Supreme Court ruling here, and what's that going to mean for L.A.?
I think it's shameful, it's disappointing, it's reminiscent of what my own family experienced, 80 years ago when they were put behind barbed wire in internment camps because of who they were. They were of Japanese descent, many spoke a different language, and I am very troubled by the majority on this Supreme Court that they would allow racial profiling to be used by ICE officials. I have constituents that feel compelled, American citizens who are carrying passports because they are concerned about being stopped by ICE. No American citizen should have to carry a passport in their own country. This is shameful. We are the land of the free, home of the brave. But the Supreme Court has said so otherwise today.
Congressman, we saw something similar last week in terms of the immigration raids at a Hyundai plant in Georgia. What message do you think that sends to foreign countries that are actively looking to invest in the United States? Is it safe to do so, especially in your home state of California?
Well, this certainly puts an ominous cloud over the goodwill put forward by the agreement between the United States and South Korea. South Korea agreed to invest $500 billion in our country. In fact, over the summer, I learned about the interest in building more manufacturing plants in my district, in addition to the one that already does exist that was established recently. So this is not a hypothetical or theoretical question you're asking me. It really affects my own district. They were rapidly standing up a battery manufacturing facility in Georgia, Hyundai, and I forget the other company that the partnership with. But the South Koreans have really expertise in battery technology, and it's an incredible potential alliance between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. If we can determine the future of a battery technology, the next generation of battery technology, which the Chinese currently control. And I would hate to see that jeopardized. I would hate to see the $500 billion of investment in this country jeopardized because of the ham-handedness and lack of coordination of ICE with the Department of Commerce.
Well, that other company was LG, Congressman, and our listeners and viewers should know that you serve on the Education and Workforce Committee. along with being ranking member on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. But from your perch on workforce, what's the message here that we're sending to foreign workers? Would you recommend that they stay away from projects like this in the United States? And if that's where we are, do we have enough American workers to do all of this work, whether it's emerging technologies in batteries, semiconductors, or any other technology we're trying to bring back to this country?
Well, look, I don't know the details about what workers were being contracted with by the South Korean government, but I suspect, given that battery technology is, on the frontiers of manufacturing, that we have to do two things at once. We're going to need some foreign workers to help us stand up these facilities while we're also ramping up the skills and knowledge of the American workforce. We can do both, and I can't imagine that the Koreans were thinking that they were going to fully staff up this Georgia facility with their workers. This was a good faith effort to bring an American manufacturing facility, a Korean investment to build a manufacturing facility in the United States to employ American people. But they need to bring some of their own expertise into the United States to be able to stand up these facilities. So this sends a terrible message to the nations that Donald Trump claims to want to engage and to bring manufacturing. By the way, manufacturing jobs in this country are down significantly this year since Donald Trump took office. So this is not a great step forward for those American manufacturing jobs to be increased when we play such hardball with our economic partners such as South Korea.
Congressman, let's talk about another subject that, of course, is dominating the headlines in Washington. It's a shutdown that we are about 22 days away from, just a handful of legislative days away from at the end of the month. Can you just talk to us a little bit about whether or not you'd be willing to work with Republicans to avert a shutdown if the idea of no rescission packages was on the table?
Well, I would love to work with them. I'm all with full intent to do that. But what I see coming out of the Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee is anything but that. It is not an olive branch. It is not what they're proposing. More extreme cuts to domestic health care and that Labor HHS bill. They're cutting AIDS funding. They're cutting funding for prevention. We're on the cusp of defeating AIDS, HIV/AIDS in this country, but I don't understand why after passing over $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and other cuts we're facing in December with the tax credits for the health care policies that Americans get off the exchange, Republicans are doing even more than that. So, if you're a low-income person, you won't be able to get, if you're kicked off of Medicaid, you won't be able to get, preventative care that comes with maybe AIDS prevention. But they're doing more to even cut that even further. This is not a bipartisan conversation they're having in the House Appropriations Committee. I don't see a sign from Republicans that they are seriously, with good faith, wanting to work out a deal by the end of this month.
Congressman, you just came back to town from California, where the big story right now is about redistricting beyond the deployment of federal troops or some of the other things that we've already had a chance to talk about. Gavin Newsom is making good on his plan to follow Texas, rewriting its map to create 5 new red seats. California will do its own to try to maintain the balance. How many seats will you get? I know this is something that you're deeply involved in. And will this mean the end of Republican politicians in California as we know them?
Oh, hardly is the case. I mean, what we're doing in California is called Proposition 50, the Election Rigging Response Act. It'll be in November. It is a measure that is being voted on by the people. It's fully transparent. and it's a suspension of our independent redistricting commission, which, by the way, I am the product of. I would not be a member of Congress today were it not for the nonpartisan independent redistricting commission that was created. But look, I favor the creation of these commissions for every state in the union, not because they will favor Democrats, but because we need fair representation. What we don't need is mid-decade redistricting, which really is tantamount to cheating. And Donald Trump and the governor of Texas, Donald Trump is saying, what Donald Trump is saying is, I'm too insecure. My policies are so unpopular that I don't want to be able to face the accountability that will be in 2026. So let's rig the election so that I can control the House of Representatives.
Well, Congressman, we'd love to talk to you as we get closer to November and that vote in California. Mark Takano, California's 39th, the voice from the Democratic side of the aisle here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington alongside Kriti Gupta. Thanks for being with us here on the Monday edition. Yeah, it's still Monday on Bloomberg TV and radio with breaking news coming from France. If you were with us a short time ago, you heard it all happen, Kriti. Francois Bayrou is going to have to find something else to do with his time. The confidence vote ended in no confidence.
In the meantime, Emmanuel Macron suddenly has a list of suitors that he now has to rifle through. We have just heard from him, in fact, which is something that we can add to the pile here. And great to have Stephen Carroll with us, the host of Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, with the latest from Paris. Stephen, what does the president have to say, and what's the short list look like?
Very short statement from the Élysée Palace saying the president takes note of the vote in Parliament. He will meet Francois Bayrou tomorrow, host him at the Élysée Palace to receive the resignation of the entire government as the Constitution now dictates, and that he will name a new Prime Minister in the coming days. Now, if that sounds familiar, I just went back and checked, and the statement in December 2024, after Michel Barnier resigned, also said that he would name a Prime Minister in the coming days, and it took over a week the last time, so perhaps we shouldn't be holding our breath too closely for when that announcement will come from Emmanuel Macron, but it is now his decision to pick somebody to succeed Francois Bayrou. Who is it? Well, that's going to be the big question. We have discussed it many times, and Kriti, you'll remember very well from last December, where we spent quite a lot of time discussing who we thought was going to be Prime Minister, and Francois Bayrou was on the list then. He got the nod last time around. This time around, we're back thinking about members of, perhaps if he picks them within his own political family. Gérald Darmanin, the current Justice Minister, said to be interested in the job, so he could be someone that perhaps could be considered for that as well. There's the likes of the current Finance Minister, Eric Lombard. Perhaps he might be somebody who Emmanuel Macron might want to pick from if he did want to go outside of his own political family. The names being bandied about from the left-leaning side. So again, this whole effort, and we've talked about it before, that perhaps Emmanuel Macron might try to win over some of the Socialist Party, the centre-left party, to see if that would help to boost the minority government, the minority that he has working in Parliament. And there we have names like former Prime Minister Bernard Cazeneuve. He's one of those as well. François Rebsamen, who's currently the housing minister in the government, or the minister for urban policy. So he's somebody that you could perhaps think of as well. Ultimately, there's quite a long list of names, and this is one of those moments of conversations happening in this city, very similar to those I'm sure that you hear in Washington, D.C. all the time, where people like the idea of putting their name forward and their name being talked about in the reference for the role. And I'm quite sure that Emmanuel Macron has been thinking about this, because the result of this vote was a foregone conclusion, as we've been discussing, but it is only him who knows where things are at this stage.
Stephen, I'm frantically Googling what French is, or what FOMO is in French, given the amount of times you and I have covered this story together. Let's play a little bit of inside baseball, or whatever it is the French play here. It feels like the socialists are the key player, or the key piece of the coalition, thank you, the key piece of the coalition that are maybe not so much so supportive of Emmanuel Macron this time around. When we saw Michel Barnier's vote of no confidence last December, they were the ones that were the swing vote. Where do the socialists stand on being kind of the make or break player for Emmanuel Macron?
Well, look, the leader of the Socialist Party in the Parliament was one of the first to speak after the results of the vote came through, to remind Emmanuel Macron that they are willing to take the government, to take the role of Prime Minister and lead a government if they should be so offered. And they've been very clear about this, and this has been part of the political jockeying that led up to this vote. The Socialist Party had a choice that they could have rode in behind Francois Bayrou and become part of a governing minority in Parliament. They've chosen instead to say, here is our alternative budget, which involves fiscal consolidation worth about half of what was in Francois Bayrou's plan, and a couple of more controversial measures like imposing a wealth tax on fortunes of over 100 million euros. They say that you can do fiscal consolidation slower. That's their condition for taking part in government as well. They've also promised that they won't use the constitutional override in Parliament to force the budget through, that they will secure agreement from across the aisles in the French Assembly to secure a backing for their budget plan, but it's very much they've laid down their positions, and there's not much sign running up to now that there is really any room for negotiation on that front as well. But they're definitely the key players to watch when we're thinking about what happens next, because without them, you end up with exactly the same numbers that Michel Barnier had and that Francois Bayrou had, and we know how that turned out.
Many thanks, Stephen. You've been great today. Stephen Carroll, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe co-host, with us here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. The breaking news and the red headline from Paris, all unfolding since the lunch hour here in Washington, D.C. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington, where we have not yet touched the story of the day here in town. It's at least the talker. It's not a very pretty one, but it carries a headline that everybody woke up to this morning in Politico. Quote, "I'm going to punch you in your blanking face. Scott Bessent threatens administration rival." Pretty remarkable, Kriti. We're actually putting on the gloves for this one here. Remember when Elon Musk showed up with the black eye? And it was right around the same time he was said to have a hallway encounter with Scott Bessent.
I was about to say, this is not the first time Scott Bessent has been in the throes.
A lot of folks are wondering, maybe that black eye wasn't from X, his child. We need to bring in the panel on this, but maybe a dramatic reading just to start here.
You're excellent at this.
Well, I'll tell you, this is what we all woke up to in Politico this morning. Scott Bessent and Bill Pulte, right, the housing finance official, showed up at the inaugural dinner at Executive Branch. This is the new swanky club in Georgetown, open for folks in Trump world. Apparently, Scott Bessent was very upset with Pulte for bad-mouthing him to the president, according to this report, citing sources. Quote, as Scott Bessent approached Mr. Pulte, "Why the blank are you talking to the president about me? Blank you. I'm going to punch you in your blanking face." Club co-owner Omid Malik tried to separate them. Bessent wasn't having it. "It's either me or him," he said. "You tell me who's getting the blank out of here, or we could go outside." Suggesting they go out to do this the old-fashioned. "To do what?" asked Pulte. "To talk?" "No," Bessent replied. "I'm going to blanking beat your blank." Now, this is a network here that has had to, at times, stand by for a president saying swears in the live throes of the news day. So keep the delay handy as we bring in Rick and Jeanne, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, back with us here in hour two. Rick, you worked at the White House in a very different administration. Were people throwing punches when Ronald Reagan was in the Oval Office? Is this the way it's done here in Washington?
Well, if they were keeping it quiet and not putting it on the front page of Politico magazine. I mean, it's and by the way, thank you, Joe, for going through that. I know how dangerous it is for anybody in your business to have to say things that you just said. But look, I mean, what a great way to get some publicity about your new club. Omid Malik must have been like, wow, this is going to put us on the front page. Just what they were hoping for. But look, I mean, we've been talking about this today. I mean, an administration in a little bit of a state of disarray, right? The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing when it comes to deportations. There have been conflicts over things like trade policy. And of course, you recounted the fight of some sort, either physical or spoken, between Scott Bessent and Elon Musk over who they were going to point to the Internal Revenue Service. And so, I just love the fact that our Treasury Secretary is very muscular attitude toward his relationship with Donald Trump and the rest of the administration.
Jeannie, I don't even know what to ask you. Just react to what Rick said to this Politico story.
Kriti, I'm not surprised you are speechless. Boy, I have to tell you, I feel bad for the other members of this club. Imagine you're a founding member, $500,000, and this is the birthday party you get invited to. It's really just very, very shocking. It's not the first time, as you mentioned, we've seen Scott Bessent in this kind of position. But, you know, you got to give him credit. He's 63. Bill Pulte is 37. And online, you're seeing people take bets as to if they did go outside, who would win. So there you go. Give Scott Bessent some credit for, you know, he's not shy about saying, let's take it outside, even if the guy is half his age. So I guess that's something.
Don't mess with Scott Bessent. Let's, by the way, remind everybody, this is the White House that's going to have a UFC fight on the South Lawn at some point next year. Is that what the birthday party? I can't remember if that's a 4th of July event. I think they put a date on that. But, Rick, I don't know. Does this speak to the whole bro culture in the White House? What does the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, think about this?
You know, we'll never know, because Susie Wiles is one thing, and that is super secretive with how she feels and what she says to other people. So she's the last person we're probably going to see line up on this one. But the reality is, I don't think we've seen the last of this. In other words, there's kind of an all-out fight within the finance community, within the Trump administration. And you and producer James totally stole my thunder. I was going to say chain link fence, put these guys in the arena in the backyard of the White House on 4th of July. And then we can retire the federal debt by putting it on pay-per-view. I mean, like, this would be fantastic.
Boy, Jeannie, I don't know if you're going to be showing up for that one, but, you know, there's a question here. I don't know if creative destruction is the phrase, but tension within a team can sometimes actually generate results. Sometimes Donald Trump likes this, right? For them to be arguing with each other and for their cases to find the best position on something. Or am I just making it up at this point here?
You're doing very well if you are, Joe. No, you know, it seems like he does. And you look at this and you think, we're told that Scott Bessent's biggest frustration against Pulte was he was talking bad about him to Donald Trump, which is sort of in line with what we see at these crazy cabinet meetings where they're trying to each outdo each other and flattering Donald Trump. So it seems to be that Donald Trump has quite a lineup of sycophants who want to bow to his feet. And this is in keeping with that. But the other thing I think is that Scott Bessent is under enormous pressure. And this reflects that. I mean, let's not forget, he was on Meet the Press this weekend, and he was asked repeatedly if tariffs are taxes. He tried to dodge it. And then in the end, he said no, which Scott Bessent knows is not true. So I might feel a little feisty if I had to say that as well to get my boss's
Interesting.
approval.
I don't know. We were talking team of rivals, or looking for examples earlier, Rick. I'm thinking more like The Who. You know, Roger Daltrey, like these guys were beating each other up, or Aerosmith. It's like one of the bands where Oasis, producer James pointing to something a bit younger. Is there actually in our remaining moments something positive about that tension inside an administration?
Well, it certainly keeps everybody focused on needing to be able to be inside the booth with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump creates this tension by the fact that he makes himself the only one who decides your fate. And this actually reinforces that. Today, I guarantee you, Bill Pulte and Treasury Secretary Bessent are all about trying to explain this to Donald Trump in the most negative light they can about the other person.
Just imagine what'll happen when they're seen together at the club. How much does that cost a year? It's like $500,000 to be a member?
No, pocket change, please.
I guess whatever you say. With Kriti Gupta, I'm Joe Mathieu. We'll be back. Late edition of Balance of Power starts at 5 p.m. Washington time. Big thanks to our panel for humoring us as always. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Thanks to the Congressman as well for being with us. Congressman Takano this hour. This is Bloomberg.